Hello and welcome to this episode of Zeitgeist Podcast with Niklas and Flo. Hi, I'm Niklas.
Hey, I'm Flo. Today we're diving into a super exciting developer tool that's been making waves in the AI and startup world. It's called Cursor. Niklas, you were bringing this up, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this company, the startup, and why it is so cool.
Yeah, so I like startups and I like writing software. I mean, that's been true for a long time. And this one is actually pretty exciting because when these first chat tools like ChatGPT 3.5 launched, one of the things that they were soon discovered to be quite good at is writing code, at least like in a simple way. Usually, if you're a developer or something, you would go to websites like Stack Overflow or somewhere like that, and to see whether somebody has already solved your problems, and research that, and write the code yourself. And then with the advent of the LLMs, basically, these tools were quite good at solving these problems as well. So you could just type them into a chat, basically. And but you would still copy it over to a code editor. And I think the first ones that I at least noticed that were kind of more like autocomplete were like GitHub Copilot, for example. They would notice or build up, I would say, kind of a prediction of what code you wanted to write. And then I think more than a year ago, basically, at least in the, I would say, builder circle of people who build software, the tool was emerging quite fast, and it was called Cursor. And it was a bit different in the sense that it allowed, it had a chat interface, and it would know your code base on what you were writing. And it built on Visual Studio Code, which is a very common software development IDE, so one of these editors. And they just integrated the chatbots, so the LLM, basically very well into the development environment. You had some kind of autocomplete, like you had in other tools as well, but the chat functionality was also really nice, and also the way changes were put into the UI and visualized and so on were really great. And I started using it, and I also started paying for it relatively soon, because it was just so much more efficient to write code with it, basically, than it was when I worked myself. And then later on, basically, and that's where it kind of gets to the startup story, I realized how fast growing the startup actually is. And that's why we are talking about it, because oftentimes, especially when I look at technologies, I don't see these, like, it's not the first obvious point that you would think this is a super fast growing startup. But here we are talking about basically one of the fastest growing SaaS companies, I think, ever. I think it took them like a year to get to 100 million in revenue, which is crazy fast. And they have a huge adoption in the developer community already.
Okay. So with startups, sometimes stuff feels a little bit unfinished. Do you have like any kind of moments where it still feels like clunky?
Yeah, so actually it was the first, there was a lot of friction, when you copy code from like your chat to your document, kind of, it would be the same if you copied to Word, right? So it feels very inefficient. And this new tool just removed this friction. So I think even in an MVP state, like when it was very early, the advantage was just so big. You were just so much faster that it felt like an immediate improvement. The most annoying part at where it currently fails is if there's a mistake in your code, basically in your code base, and you ask it to fix it, and it doesn't fix it. And you do like 3-4 rounds of trying to fix the same mistakes, but it doesn't really solve it. That's the most annoying thing, and it's still present.
Okay. And what do you think? who's Cursor really built for? Like indie hackers, or startup teams, or really like enterprise companies?
Yeah, I think so. I think generally speaking, you can use it in all environments. It works best with relatively small code bases. So if you have really small microservices or you have generally small applications and it needs a lot of content text. So for example, if I would build some software with it, I would, for example, make sure that my database scheme is part of the code base, because then it basically knows what the database looks like and it can engineer like backend and front end and all these things. That is obviously easier for small code bases. And the biggest profiteers, I would say, are individuals. So if you build your application yourself and you have the picture in your mind how it would look like when it's finished, and you have an idea of how you would design it, you could basically just enter these ideas and the way towards it into the chat of Cursor, and it would get you there a lot faster than if you would write the code yourself.
Okay. What do you think the real market opportunity is for AI-powered editors over the next few years?
Gigantic. It's basically, if you're brutal, you could say it's the whole software market. So the whole software development market in a sense of software developers. That's probably not true. It's a part of this market, and I'm not 100% sure how large this market is, but it's multi-billion definitely. Even the market for the software probably is somewhere in the billions, I would assume. There are few different solutions. You could even try a competitor, or not a direct competitor, but there's Replit, it's called. It basically allows people who don't know how to code to build and deploy a simple application. I think that could be fun. Cursor is more on the development, like a developer assistant, but it just makes people a lot faster. So it's a gigantic market.
Mm-hmm. And this is what gives Cursor the edge compared
Cursor.
to
So I think for Cursor, there are a few things that give a Cursor an edge. So first is there's really an early adoption. I think as with a lot of tools like Excel or something like that, if you're really used to it and you're really good with it, there's some resistance to change, like to switch to other tools. Like a competitor, for example, is Windsurf, but it's a bit different. You have to get used to it. And then there are other tools like Replit or Lovable that are quite a bit more different, but I think you wouldn't necessarily churn if you really like the tool. So the way back is quite a bit.
And how is Cursor monetizing its products?
It's a subscription. Basically, it's for premium subscription. It's like 20 euros a month, and you get a number of fast requests to large language models. Basically, so to something like GPT-4 or whatever you like. Typically in coding, you use Sonnet 3.5, 3.7, or now Google Gemini. That's the typical models that are used. And you have a contingent of requests, and you can buy additional ones.
Okay. Do you think tools like this will eventually reduce the demand for traditional software engineers?
A lot of people say yes. I'm not sure. The market will definitely change, but till now I have the feeling that the world is not saturated with software or anywhere close. Like you can still build a lot, and if there were more people and it were cheaper, we would just build more software because it makes sense, more efficient. So I'm not sure. It's a prediction. Probably it will impact the market, especially at companies, but it will also just lead to software being built a lot faster. I think it's just really important for developers to learn to use these tools. I think if you're not learning to use it, you will be left behind because it will become a requirement for jobs.
Okay. If you had to recommend it to a specific type of developer, who would benefit the most?
Yeah, so if you're super specialized and you're developing really foundational work, you will probably be impacted the least. If you're like full stack, I would say developing non-groundbreaking, normal software, then you are definitely impacted the most, or you can profit the most, because at the end of the day, you can just do more for the people you work for.
Okay. And then last question, what's missing? Is there like any kind of future you miss? What would make it a 10 of 10 tool?
That's a very good question. I think currently these
This is what
tools
I'm known
lack
for.
understanding of large code bases at points in time. So if you have like written a lot of code, then they stop understanding everything, and then they write stupid stuff, and you need to remind them to write smarter stuff. And it would be really great if these tools would be able to work with really large code bases. So with a lot of code and keeping everything in the context window.
I see. Okay. So I guess that's it for today. Deep dive into Cursor. If AI is becoming your coding partner instead of just a tool, this kind of technology might be the beginning of a real shift.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.